2nd of April, 6th Sunday in Lent, Palm Sunday. Sermon on Philippians chapter 2 verses 5 to 11 and Matthew chapter 26 verses 31 to 75. Palm Sunday is the day when we often recall Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem, attended by crowds hailing him as the one who had come to save. However, that triumph was the prelude to Jesus' suffering and death, and so this year it is that on which our lectionary readings focus. Paul's letter to the church in Philippi contains a powerful description of the willingness of Christ to bring about our salvation, what he gave up and what he gained, and it's also a declaration of Christ's divinity. Jesus was in very nature God, the divine second person of the Trinity. His status was unassailable, but he didn't cling to his equality with the Father. In this status-conscious world, there are few who would willingly relinquish their status. We have only to think of the way in which disgraced politicians hold on, denying all wrongdoing, hoping to ride it out so as not to step back from some coveted position of power or privilege. Jesus, however, having the highest status possible, made himself nothing and took the persona of a slave. Few Bible translations use that disgraceful word, slave. They prefer to say Jesus became a servant. But the Greek word used in Paul's letter, doulos, means slave. There's nothing lower than a Greco-Roman slave. They were truly nothing. Even more than that, Jesus, who was God, became human and still is. He thus became subject to pain, suffering and death, and as a human he humbled himself further, and in full obedience to the Father he accepted death on a cross. It was Jesus' death in that most painful and humiliating way that reconciled us to God. During his earthly life, Jesus suffered all that human wickedness could inflict upon him: opposition, derision, betrayal, desertion, denial, cruelty, mockery, pain, thirst, death. He took all that willingly, and in doing so he demonstrated that he could triumph over sin and death, not retaliating but submitting. He died a sinless, perfect man, and in that way he defeated sin, and in his resurrection he defeated death. Jesus not only returned to life, the Father exalted him to the highest place, the ultimate status, and gave him the name above all names, so that ultimately at his name every knee should bow, and every tongue confess him to be Christ the Lord. Those words of Paul are proof indeed, if proof were needed, that Jesus is equal to the Father. The words are a direct quotation from Isaiah chapter 45 verse 23, where Almighty God applies them to himself. Before me every knee will bow, by me every tongue will swear. And now they're bestowed upon Jesus. And this is not to diminish the Father's glory, far from it. Rather, it is to the glory of the Father. When we read of the events leading to Jesus' arrest, trial and death, we see some of the suffering he faced. First, from his own closest friends and followers, the 12. He knew one of them would betray him. But when he revealed this to his disciples, they all claimed that they would remain faithful. Peter, always the first to speak, said, "Even if the others desert you, I never will. And even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And yet he did. In Gethsemane, Jesus went through deep personal anguish when he contemplated what lay ahead, only a few hours away. He asked his followers to watch over him as he prayed, and pleaded with the Father for a way out, for a different course to follow. And yet his faithful friends fell asleep, and so that he was alone in his sorrow. 3 times Jesus prayed and finally found the strength to face his suffering, but each time he found his friends sleeping. And then the betrayer arrived, the perfidious Judas, who revealed Jesus to the crowd sent to arrest him, with, of all things, a kiss. Peter sought to protect Jesus by attacking one of the men with his sword. But when Jesus was taken, all the disciples deserted him and fled. Under arrest, Jesus was questioned in an attempt for him to incriminate himself. False evidence was laid against him, lies were told. But when Jesus confirmed that he was the Messiah, who would one day come in power and glory, he was accused of blasphemy. He was spat at, struck, and mocked. As a final preliminary to his crucifixion, Peter utterly denied him. Questioned by some of the crowd around the high priest's house to which Jesus had been taken, Peter 3 times denied all knowledge of Jesus with strong words. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know the man." And again, but this time with curses and oaths, "I don't know the man." According to Luke's account, Jesus overheard Peter and turned and looked at him. It was an added source of anguish. The Gospel accounts reveal some of what Jesus went through in order to purchase our reconciliation, our redemption, our salvation. Returning to Paul's letter to the Philippians, why did he write these words about Jesus' amazing sacrifice? It was to impress his readers with the need to have the same attitude as Christ, who relinquished everything: heaven, dignity, divinity, life itself, in order to serve us and redeem us. Paul was calling on the church to have the same love, the same unity of purpose, the same selflessness that Christ had displayed. It's a very tall order, but Paul's words are a challenge to all of us. This coming Eastertide, may we remember the cost of our redemption and the duty we have to each other, to every member of our churches, and to everyone who comes through our doors.